Reinventing implies some kind of big break with the past. What you have to do if you're living out the narrative properly is, you just quit your job and you walk into the sunset and say, I'm going to figure it out. The truth is that's like a very foolish way to reinvent yourself.
Hey listeners, this is Leading Up, the Work Shift. I'm your host, Elizabeth Weingarten. Do you feel like you're flailing in your career? Like you're throwing spaghetti against the wall, trying to see what sticks? I've felt that way at different points. I started out as a journalist, then pivoted to being an applied behavioral scientist, transitioned into tech, and then became a book author. But my next move never felt clear or certain. We are all constantly reinventing ourselves over the course of our careers. That's what I'm talking to Dorie Clark about this week. She cracked the code on turning what most people call flailing into strategic career moves. You might know her best-selling books, Reinventing You and The Long Game, How to Be a Long-Term Thinker in a Short-Term World. Here's what we're covering. Why that leap and the net will appear advice is garbage. How to actually de-risk your career moves. And why your need to stay busy is sabotaging your ability to think clearly about your future. Plus, some unexpected wisdom gleaned from Broadway. Yes, Broadway. If you're stuck, recently got laid off, or you just know there's something bigger out there for you, but you don't know how to get it, this conversation will give you the roadmap. Let's go. Dorie Clark, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Elizabeth, thank you for having me.
So you have worn many hats throughout your career. Just to name a few: reporter, presidential campaign spokesperson, nonprofit executive director, theater lyricist. And the last one is one I definitely want to talk to you about in a little bit as a huge musical theater nerd myself. But another way of saying this is that you're somebody who has reinvented herself again and again. And so I'm curious, when you think about these different reinventions, are there any kind of red threads or through lines that connect them?
Yeah, for a lot of us, we instinctively and intuitively feel like there's a through line. We know there's a through line. But the biggest problem that I see with people who are making some kind of a reinvention is that we don't realize that we have to articulate it to other people and help them sort of understand the journey. Because to them, it looks like you did this in the past. Now you're doing this other thing, which is completely different and random. What happened? And they don't get it. It doesn't make any sense. And when they're confused, they're like, oh, I don't know, is she really qualified? This seems a little weird. And just you might be the most qualified person in the world, but we have to bring people along on that journey to help them see it. And so for me, I would say that honestly, a lot of the work that I do has been fundamentally about similar things. My little joke is when I was in college, someone asked me, what I wanted to do for a living. Fundamentally, I'm trying to figure out how I can make money by reading the newspaper and giving people my opinion. And I think honestly, most of my jobs are some variation of that. So.
I love that. Well, as the daughter of two journalists who worked for a very long time at newspapers, I appreciate that. You mentioned in your 20s that you kind of had this moment of feeling like you were kind of flailing, and you write and talk a lot about how you tried out all these different careers and you were kind of struggling to make success stick in any one of them. And as somebody who has personally had multiple moments of kind of failing and flailing throughout my career, well into my 30s, I should say, it's very relatable. But I'm wondering if you could really take us back to that decade of your life and how and we're kind of getting at this a little bit, but how did it really help you develop that roadmap to successful reinvention?
I would settle on some kind of career and I'm like, this is it. And then like a year later, I would just get ignominiously tossed out and nope, that didn't work. I wanted to get a doctorate. I did get a master's degree. I wanted to get a doctorate. Nope. All the programs that I applied for turned me down. Okay. That didn't work. So I was like, what else? What else could I do that would have reading and writing and ideas? And I thought, okay, journalism. And so I was a journalist. I got hired. I was a journalist for a year, and then nope, I get laid off as a journalist. So then I go to work on political campaigns, and I worked on two like pretty prominent campaigns, but then they both lost. So there was a lot of churn. So I was definitely flailing, but failing, I feel like, is a little bit of a state of mind. And I think that's the important distinction. I didn't ever really think of myself as a failure. For me, the most important thing, especially having written a book about this, is I really want to encourage people to recognize failure is a label, and you can choose not to buy into that label. Because for me, failing is about like giving up, or about like, you just pack it all and you curl into a ball and die or something. But as long as you are learning things, and as long as you are iterating and evolving and just treating things as data, it can be incredibly disappointing. I mean, I was super disappointed when all of those things happened, because you do pin a lot of hope on them. You do say, oh, I thought this was going to be the thing, and it's not fun. But failure is really a kind of definitive external judgment that I don't think it's helpful in those circumstances. I think we need to be a little kinder to ourselves, keep plowing away, and eventually you do finally find the place where the fortress walls are the weakest, and then you can storm in. But I'm curious about you. What did your journey look like, Elizabeth, to get you here today?
Yeah, gosh, the journey that comes to mind for me is writing my book. And it took me really a decade from having an initial idea to actually getting it published.
So what was the thing? Were agents just not seeing the promise in what you were doing, or why were there so many roadblocks with this one?
I had an agent who I was working with who was wonderful and really, really smart. And I think I had a bunch of ideas, and she was kind of trying to help guide me. For me, the thing that kept kind of pulling me back was I just knew that this subject was something I wanted to find a way into. I couldn't stop thinking about it. My book is all about questions, actually. And I just was kind of endlessly fascinated by questions. And also I knew that books had such a profound impact on my life, and that I wanted to write a book that I hoped would be a companion for others, the way that books had been companions for me. So I was really kind of drawn by this central motivation. I'm curious for you too, kind of what in those moments where you felt exhausted and dispirited, what kept you kind of coming back to the mat, right, so to speak, and allowed you to keep going again and again?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like a lot of people, there's two answers, right? I mean, there's this sort of pragmatic and practical answer, which is at a certain point, if you, in particular, if it's your full-time job or your day job, you need to make money. And so you need to figure something out. It is highly motivating, and probably the most motivating period and frightening was the week of September 11th, 2001, was when I got laid off for the first time. And I got laid off actually before it even happened. I got laid off on September 10th, 2001. Suddenly, the morning of September 11th was like, oh, la, 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 this is going to be when I start my job search. And then it was, no, that is really not going to happen this week. That is not the time to do it. And my employer, they were cheapskates, and they gave me a week's severance pay. So somehow, in the midst of this crazy national tragedy, I had a week to figure out how to support myself and to pay my rent. I felt a keen sense of motivation, but there was a parallel level for sure, which was about, the kind of broader sense of mission about what I wanted to be doing, not just making money of some kind, but I really felt just deeply that I wanted to be somehow in the world of ideas and making a contribution. And I felt like I could, and I felt like I should. And I think that, you hear a lot, of course. I mean, it's a very common thing. People ask about, imposter syndrome, or that they feel like, oh, I don't know, everyone else has more experience, or everyone else is better, or something like that. And, certainly those are really common feelings. But one thing that I always suggest to readers, or to people who are, members of the online community that I run, the fundamental structural error is that when we are looking at our quote unquote competitors in the world, they're not really competitors, but like our reference set, we're looking at the people who are the best in the world, and we're holding ourselves up to that. And it's like, no, 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 that's not the right reference set, at least when you're getting started. No one is going to be as good when they start as they are after they've practiced for a while. What you need to do is look at the worst possible person that is still succeeding at what you want to do. You need to look at the person who is, being published by the magazine that you want to be published by, and you think what they're doing is rubbish. And look at that person, and guess what? They were able to get in, shouldn't you? And that's what we need to really focus on, is like, you know what? At least I'm better than that guy. Of course I can do it.
That's incredible. I love that. And you've given me a new way of framing. Of course, we all compare ourselves to people, right? Setting your sights just down a few rungs as kind of a much more motivating factor. I want to talk a little bit about the long game, because you mentioned this very real financial motivation, right? And I think a lot of people right now are in the middle of career transitions or pivots that maybe they didn't choose, and they've been laid off from a job, or they left a job that's just really not the right fit anymore. There are a lot of folks that I think in those moments feel a lot of pressure to kind of just do something right now to alleviate whether it's the financial pressure or just the discomfort of sitting in that in-between uncertain space. And that may lead to some fixation on the short term. How, in that context, do people start to balance long-term thinking, short-term needs, and short-term action?
Yeah, you raise a really important point. We also, in this area, have to be thinking on a couple of parallel tracks too. I mean, to the extent that it's possible, holding out for the thing that we want to do and the thing that feels like a great fit is wonderful. Like, yes, let's do that if we can. It's also a reality that sometimes in the short term, if there are financial exigencies, you just have to do something, and that's okay. The important thing to keep in mind is that it's really easy for humans to slip into binary thinking and to feel like, oh, it's all or nothing, or it's this or it's that. And I think it's a perfectly fine and normal situation to be in. Please, let's hope that no one does something that they actually hate. But if you don't love it, but you are doing it to fulfill some other important need, like making money for your family or whatever, that is totally okay. But the thing that we need to do is always keep at least one eye on the horizon and say, okay, I'm doing this now. What is the way that I can leverage this for the future? What is the way that I can use this job as a way of building my resume so that I have the skills to get the thing that I want one day, building my network so that I can meet people so that eventually I can be in front of the right kind of people that can hire me for the thing that I want. Maybe it's even just a job that's like, you're sort of on autopilot because you're really overqualified. So great. If you don't have to use your brain very much, fantastic. Let your mind, wander in the crevices of your day so that you can be ideating about, the thing, the novel you want to write, or the startup that you want to start, or whatever it is. And it's a way to give yourself a little bit of hope too, because it's easy to just say, oh, I'm stuck doing this thing and I don't know when I'll be able to get out of it. But you can always be planning.
I love that. And what strikes me, kind of a couple things based on what you just said. One is just the power of self-awareness in these moments, and knowing, what am I optimizing for right now? And what am I not? And kind of what are the trade-offs that I'm making? We can also get caught up in this idea that there is some perfect situation out there for us, right? That, oh, if I get that next job, it's kind of the arrival fallacy, and then everything will be perfect and my life will be unicorns and rainbows. But in reality, there could be something about this current role, as you just said. Maybe it's a job where you don't love it, but it's fine, but you don't have to use your brain that much. So you can actually work a little bit on that novel in the I love how you put the crevices of your day. Maybe you're an aspiring theater lyricist, who knows?
We tend to beat ourselves up a lot if we're not, constantly maxing out on all the fronts. But the truth is, one of the concepts that I actually talk about in my book, The Long Game, is what I call thinking in waves. And there are natural waves and natural cycles that we have to be mindful of. There are going to be times when you are going to be all in, you have the ability to just focus so intently on your work and be heads down on it. There are other times where that's less appropriate. Maybe it's you're having to do caregiving. Maybe you're having a health challenge. Maybe there is some other thing or some other reason that it's it's better for you to be in a mode of connecting with people or networking or, whatever it is. And you're going to be prioritizing different things. You can't do all the things all the time. It's also true that you can't neglect certain things and like never do them. Like we do have to cover the bases eventually, but you can take turns.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think about that conversation, the like perennial having it all conversation, right? And the idea that you can have it all, but probably not all at once. And so how do you kind of start to think differently about that concept in your own life? Repeating kind of small steps or small actions over time can really help to achieve long-term plans. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that and also where maybe taking a risk or a big leap fits into that framework.
This is a big misconception. The fact that so much of the conversation around reinvention in general is kind of around risks, right? There's famous books, leap and the net will appear. But every time I hear that, I'm like, God, I don't want to do that. That sounds terrible. How do you know? How do you know, lady? like I wouldn't take that bet. So I'm a person that is very into de-risking. And I think that there is a myth that reinventing or whatever implies some kind of big break with the past, that that what you have to do if you're living out the narrative properly is you just quit your job and you walk into the sunset and say, I'm going to figure it out. And the truth is that's like a very foolish way to reinvent yourself. I mean, sometimes you are forced to do it, admittedly. Like when I got laid off, I had no notice. I didn't know it was coming. So yes, I did have to reinvent myself rather quickly. But for most people, what is a far better way to do it is something that has minimal to no risk. And that is a story that doesn't really get told very often. But, one that I share in Reinventing You is there's a great example of a woman named Patricia Fripp who went on to great acclaim over the past few decades as a paid professional speaker. But of all things, I discovered she started her career as a hairdresser. And for literally a decade, she had this hair salon and she would do demonstrations at hair shows. And it turned out she was good at that. She would talk about it with her clients. She had these kind of corporate clients that would come in and they were like, oh, you're amazing. Like you have such great charisma. Why don't you come and speak to my team? And she would. And at first it was free and then she'd get paid a little bit of money. But over this 10-year period that she had the lease on the salon, she eventually just started making more and more of her money from speaking and less from hairdressing. And by the time she closed out, she just decided not to renew the lease. It was perfectly set. She had no risk at all because she had more than made up her hairdressing income with her speaking income, and she had made a complete career transition. And a big cornerstone of this is if you have a long enough runway, if you are patient enough, if you start planning and you start doing things in small ways, then you really don't have to have a lot of risk in your reinvention.
That is such an important myth to bust. What I'm pulling out of this too is going back to that power of narrative and kind of both the mythical story out there that, as you say, to kind of reinvent yourself, you have to have this huge departure with the past and it has to be very dramatic. But also the fact that, it seems like kind of the longer runway also gives you time to start to craft what that story is that you're telling about yourself and try to connect the dots a little bit between kind of here's who I am right now and who I want to be and who I'm becoming.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Elizabeth. It's true. Other people are not going to take the time to do it or to figure it out. It's not like they're opposed to your reinvention. It's not like anyone has really a chip on their shoulder about it. Like, what? You were a hairdresser. You can't possibly be a public speaker. Like, they don't care. If you're able to just give them a plausible narrative, where you say, oh, I actually started out as a hairdresser and I began doing these sessions for clients, and eventually they kept inviting me back, and now I'm a corporate trainer. Probably what they'll say is, oh, cool, that's great. And you've helped them see it. But we just need to take the time to really make the effort to put it in their heads.
Yeah, I remember the first time I had to do that when I was transitioning from the applied behavioral science world into tech. It's kind of a notorious field where if you haven't done the exact job that they're looking for, a lot of times it's very hard to convince them, well, I have these skills that are transferable and let me show you how. So it was a moment where I had to actually rethink one of the topics that you talk a lot about in Reinventing You, which is building a personal brand. And this feels like a topic that is both kind of overused and misunderstood at the same time. What do you think people commonly misunderstand when it comes to kind of developing their own personal brand?
Yeah, I have so many thoughts about that. But first, I'm actually curious, Elizabeth. Can you talk a little bit? Like when you started to first really hone in for yourself on the question of personal brand, how did you think about it, and what did you do tangibly to make yourself and your personal brand more palatable in the new tech world you were seeking to enter?
Yeah. My first kind of jump from applied behavioral science into tech was into marketing. And so what I learned through some research and through conversations with folks who were in, roles that I thought I could be a fit for was that the firm that I had worked at, there were a lot of similarities between the frameworks that we were using to kind of study human behavior and the ways that marketers were studying human behavior and kind of pinpointing different steps on a journey, right, to understand concepts and trying to get people ultimately to buy your product or kind of change their behavior in some way. So I had this aha moment where it was like, oh, if I can just frame what I've been learning kind of along these lines and help people understand that, hey, I've been actually answering some of the questions that you're asking in a different way, and let me show you how, that I saw people's eyes light up, right, and really understand what I was talking about. And so I think for me, it started with understanding where's the overlap in the problem spaces, right? Have I been addressing a pain point in a maybe new and different way? And how do I kind of connect those dots? And so I think that was step one. And step two, in terms of kind of the overall brand, I think for me, it was really getting rooted in my values and kind of really thinking, okay, who do I admire, who I kind of see in the world, and what feels authentic for me? When do I feel most like myself? And how do I really strive to bring those parts of myself into as many communications as I possibly can, especially kind of in this transition when you can feel really unmoored, right, and kind of unsettled. So those are some of the things that helped me, but I'm curious for you as you were on your own path to discovering this, if any of that resonates or not.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate you walking us through the process that you followed. I think that's right on. I always like to harken back to that thing from junior high math, which is the Venn diagram, where it's like the two circles that are overlapping in the middle, and you have to really find that place. It is not impossible, but it is really complicated for people to envision how a person can jump from, one totally independent, autonomous circle into another one. But if you can find a way, even honestly, if it's a little bit tenuous, to say, no, these circles are connected, they overlap. Look, I was just ambling slightly from one circle into this area where it overlaps with the other circle, and really it's the same thing. It just makes it so much cognitively easier for people to grasp it. And the truth is, you don't have to have just one reinvention. It can be a process. I always like to say, like, if you were a lawyer that really wanted to one day be a film director, it's probably easier to start doing entertainment law so that you can at least get into the orbit of these studios and meet people and make connections and see how it works. And then you can be an agent or something like that. You can keep moving your way over. And eventually you meet enough people and you see enough openings that you can dive in and find a way to become a director, as opposed to just going straight in. But there's also variations that you can do. If you were a criminal lawyer, maybe you find a way to, write your own screenplay about being a criminal attorney, and then you can direct that. There's a lot of ways to manage it, but usually it involves saying, well, what's my toehold in this reinvention? And then taking advantage of that. And then if you want to pivot further from there, you can.
Do you want to know one of the biggest barriers to successful career transitions? Getting past AI resume screening systems. Here's why Dorie says the human connection matters more than ever.
A classic piece of advice, but it is one that is more salient now than ever, is the importance of having warm introductions and getting in front of an actual person. And the reason that this is so important now is that for a lot of larger companies, they're using AI to screen resumes. And if you have a non-traditional resume, it is probably going to be bonked because the AI is like, well, this doesn't make any sense. We have a profile of the people who are good at doing this type of job, and you are not it. And again, the whole premise of AI as a prediction engine is that it's really good at understanding what has come before. It is not necessarily very good at imagining all the things that didn't happen but could have happened and might be, and it could be great. That's where it has less experience. And so you really need to get in front of a person that hopefully you, because you have practiced talking about your narrative through line and explaining, okay, yes, here is how, point A, where I started, relates to point Z, where I'm wanting to go. Let me paint that picture for you. If you can get that person bought in, they can be an advocate for you. They can help you get there. But most likely, if you have a non-traditional path, a machine is not going to see it. Typically, they're not going to necessarily grasp it. So you need to have an advocate on the inside.
One question I imagine some folks are asking themselves right now is, well, how do you get to that person? How do you think about kind of the most actionable advice that somebody could take tomorrow if they're like, oh, networking, I don't want to do that?
For me, the most important element of this is recognizing that whenever people feel uncomfortable, or they say they feel uncomfortable about networking, usually it is because they are picturing a very specific thing in their head. And what they're picturing is, I need a thing. I need to go get a thing. I need to be like a shark in the water swimming around until I find an opportunity, and then I will just put my jaws around it. And of course, that feels weird and upsetting because it is fundamentally predatory behavior based on you needing something. And I think it's really important to take a step back and say, the best, and I would say the only legitimate form of networking is really done when you don't need anything. You don't need anything. You don't want anything. You are like, 100% zen in this, because it needs to be a practice that you do, which is about how to make friends with interesting people and meet interesting people. And if you do that regularly as a discipline, and, the good news about, you have to be disciplined about a lot of things that are not fun. This is actually fun. I mean, most people, even if they don't, quote unquote, like networking, they like friends, right? And so if you can meet interesting friends and not need anything from them, then it is not a craven manipulative exercise. You're just getting to know people. And in the course of getting to know people, presumably if it is a genuine relationship, you want to do nice things for them. They will want to do nice things for you, and it will take care of itself. It actually is one of the things that will take care of itself because you have taken the time to get to know people socially. And so I'm a big fan. There is an author from the 80s named Harvey Mackay who wrote a book, which I love the title, which is called Dig Your Well Before You're Thirsty. And I think that is probably the most important networking advice.
So I am completely in agreement with everything that you shared. And I think this was something that I stumbled my way towards in my 20s, actually, because you probably wouldn't guess it, but I'm an introvert. And so stepping into conferences, group rooms of people that I don't know is very stressful to me. And so the only way that I could, and I've never been somebody that thrives in a type of relationship that feels transactional, right? So I was like, I just can't do this. It doesn't feel right. I need to just talk to the people that I want to talk to, and we'll see what happens. And so for me, the thing that I anchored to was, how do I just get to know this person and try to enjoy it, right? And try to just, to your point, whether it's finding a new friendship, which is, an ideal goal, or just, how do I just enjoy this conversation? We're at this conference together, or I'm, seeing somebody in the hallway. Can I just ask an interesting question and get to know this person a little bit better? And that's a success if I have that outcome. Otherwise, I don't know, it feels really soulless.
Yeah, love that. That's great.
In addition to your life, right, as this kind of expert communications professor, you are very involved in musical theater. And I'm a huge musical theater lover and very impressed that you kind of found your way into this world. And so I am curious, which classic musical theater character do you find most inspirational when it comes to reinventing themselves or long-term thinking? So who really exemplifies that?
Oh, that's fantastic. I love the question. It's reinvention and long-term thinking through the lens of musical theater. So, okay, I'm gonna mount a defense. I'm gonna mount a controversial defense. I think half the listeners will be like, wait, what? But for the people who know, you know. So, okay, really my favorite musical, I'm very partial to Rent by Jonathan Larson. And one of the things that, as a capitalist, I have to say, the whole premise is that these guys, it's an updated version of La Boheme, and they're like squatters. They're like cool artsy squatters in the East Village in New York in the 90s when it was a little bit derelict. And so there's this guy that they're friends with, and he is like working with /for a developer, and they're going to develop the neighborhood where everybody's in, and they're going to use the funds to create this kind of cool like art space, like maker space or whatever. But they're going to tear down all the derelict buildings where people are living, and they're going to make like cool, yuppie housing, which basically is what happened. And everybody thinks that he is like such a sellout. He's like so terrible. Like, I can't believe you're in with a man. He's trying to do a good thing for his friends, and they completely are slagging on him. They don't appreciate him. And, and he really reinvented himself because he was part of their, arty tribe, but he reinvented himself into becoming, more of this like, capitalist entrepreneur. And they just would not give him a moment's peace about that. And I think it's unfair, honestly. I think he was trying to do a good thing. So I want to respect and affirm his reinvention.
I love that. And maybe a lesson to all of us that if you know somebody that is in the process of reinvention, offer that person a little support, right? So that's a musical lesson. I will say my favorite is probably Elphaba from Wicked. I feel like she has her own kind of reinvention story. And if you haven't seen Wicked or Rent, this is your invitation to go out there and check it out. The title of this podcast is The Work Shift. And so, the idea is we're trying to talk about these moments when shift happens at work. And so I'm curious for you, what do you do in your professional life when shift happens?
This is the question. It's a good thing you have a podcast about this, Elizabeth. Shifts are happening all the time, obviously. But the thing that I think is the most upsetting is just when it's an unexpected shift, there's just this, constant movement. People get hired, people are leaving, clients come and go. There's always something. But fundamentally, what is upsetting for people and what's hard and where we really have to concentrate is that often we get to a place where we feel like, oh, it's good now. I like it right now. I know what I'm doing. I'm good at it. I like my coworkers. I've got great clients. And you want to take it in a box and you want to like screenshot it and be like, right here, this is it. Like, I want to run with this. And then it gets upsetting when that thing shifts because you're like, oh my gosh, I was just like in the zone here. Why did this have to change? And it is so frustrating. And I think that we have to, first of all, acknowledge that that's the case, that is a pretty legitimate feeling. And also, I think it's about tapping back into the Zen mindset a little bit and just saying, okay, this is not the universe slapping me in the face personally here. This is also probably not an unprecedented thing because change is happening all the time in every level of work, in every level of relationships. I mean, I think about this in my personal life. I moved to Miami a few years ago, and it was hard to make friends at first, and I was just starting to make friends. And then this one gets a job in Houston, and these guys decide, no, they're not really, they're going to sell their place in Miami. They're going to move to Portugal. And it's like, I had just made friends. Like, why are you doing this to me? And I think, it's like that at work as well. But it's just recognizing, okay, if this is the ongoing state of affairs, we have to just step back and not be so invested and recognize that some bad things are going to come, some good things also are going to come, and it's not permanent. It's also not fatal. We just have to roll with it as best we can, and that's the skill we have to cultivate.
As you were talking before you said this, I was like, sounds a lot like a Zen mindset. And so I think that's totally right. And it's both, if things are going really well, it's not forever. But also if things aren't going really well, that's not forever. And so there's kind of comfort on both sides, I think, when it comes to the kind of constant shifts and change. And I appreciate you sharing about that experience, making friends. That resonates tremendously with me as somebody that's moved to a lot of different cities and felt at various times like, oh, things are just so great right now. Can they just stay that way, right? And then everything inevitably changes. So I know we just have a minute left here. Is there any final words for folks listening in that you want to add, either when it comes to the process of reinventing yourself, long-term thinking and planning, musical theater, anything that we didn't get to that you want to share?
I think we've covered some amazing ground, Elizabeth. This is great. I will just say that on the topic of reinvention, that one of the things that is useful for all of us to keep in mind is that to a certain extent, you have to treat the people around you like a constituency that you have to be mindful of, and to try to try to not convince exactly, but we often make the erroneous assumption that other people, as soon as they hear our plan, are going to buy into it. They're going to say, great. They're going to be cheerleading all the way. And the truth is, it's a little harder than that, partly because of their own self-interest. Like, they might be a little bit freaked out because they're invested in thinking of you as a certain way, or perhaps, the money you bring in doing a certain thing. And it's really important to recognize that you have to be thoughtful about your communication strategy and the repeat communication strategy to tell people in your lives and kind of bring them along on the journey so that they understand that you really are serious about this and that you really have thought it through. Sometimes they might assume that you're being precipitate with what you're doing. And we need to show, no, this is actually really thoughtful. I actually have a free tool if people are interested. It's a Reinventing You self-assessment. They can get it at DorieClark.com/reinvent. But it helps you think through many of these questions, including how do you be thoughtful about the ways that you communicate your reinvention, not just to strangers, but also to the people even closest to you.
I love that. Thank you so much, Dorie. It has been such a pleasure talking to you. I have a million more questions, but unfortunately, we'll let you go. But thank you so much for being here. It was such a fun conversation.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So fun.
That's all for this episode of Leading Up, the Work Shift. Speaking of reinvention, thank you so much for listening to our very first episode of this new iteration of the podcast. What career questions would you like answered in future episodes? Let us know. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and we might just read your review on the show. Follow Leading Up, the Work Shift on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you listen to podcasts. And if you want more from Dorie Clark, check out her courses on communication on Udemy.com. This podcast is produced by Udemy in partnership with Pod People. Until next time, keep leading up.